Hello, this is my summary of chapters 4 and 7 of best practices in literacy instruction, uh, looking at the best practices for both early education literacy and content and disciplinary literacy. So to start, in chapter 4 on early education literacy best practices, one of the first things they talked about was fictional text comprehension. So some things that you should be making sure you're doing and things that go into this are teachers should be using pre-reading, during reading, and post-reading activities. The pre-reading is going to help activate background knowledge. The during reading and strategies are going to uh, have the teacher help the students make connections to whatever it is that they're reading. And then the post-reading will help with comprehension, and you can do things like having students retell a story back. They also talked about then informational text comprehension. And in that, they had studies that showed that students can learn using informational texts. Things like photographs can be really helpful, or pictures in the information, especially if the information is tough to comprehend or understand. The pictures will give students clues. But then the big thing is getting students interested. That's a big key. And things like photographs, making sure that the text maybe are things students are interested in, that will make comprehension easier. They also talked about word study, and going into that a little bit. We need to teach students how words and writing work. That's called print concepts. So just kind of actually getting into why are things the way that they are. And some of the things that you can do for that are using phonetics, or how words or parts of words sound, phonics, associating letters with their corresponding sounds, looking at high frequency words, things that come up often, words that students are going to see a lot in different readings, and being able to identify those words on site. And that's something that requires practice. Students need to do this over some time and get used to it. And then just as they've used that practice, seeing these words, it'll become more secondhand. And then the last thing is fluency, which comes from practicing all of those skills together. Uh, there was also talk about just working on students' writing, something that starts early on, where students and children might even be just practicing their writing and things that don't look like actual writing. It's not actual words, it's just the kind of practice of it. And then as they get into individual letters, individual words, and then that whole writing kind of comes together, and it'll start to become more of the standard writing that we're looking for. And then just to kind of get students to be better writers, this gets best supported through authentic experiences like writing notes or letters, having students do things that they'll actually do in their everyday life. And that could even be as much as, writing notes and letters to people and sending them out, things that they're going to actually have to do later on. That helps students understand what they're doing, and it makes it more relevant to them. There's also speaking and listening. So, children's reading and writing skills come from their ability to speak. And students can learn by speaking in full sentences, learning how interactions typically work, and giving students the opportunity to describe. And then the last thing in that chapter was about vocabulary development. So that involves a whole slew of different things. Um, Part of that is just the more amount of words that students are exposed to, the more they'll learn. And the earlier you can do that, the better it is for students. So the goal that they always say is that students should know, or children should know, 10,000 words by the time they're age 6. So you're giving students also vocabulary work when they encounter new words while reading. So something maybe where they have to define words, put those words into sentences, something that will help them to learn the words that they're not familiar with. Again, this is something that needs repetition and explanation to learn those new words. Maybe the teacher has to define them, and just something where students are constantly doing it over and over again so that they get into a routine. And then students also will learn more when words are linked by topic or subject. So things that are all science related, or if you're in a history class and they're all related to the Civil War, those are going to be things that they will understand more because they're linked in some way. So that was about chapter 4 with just early education literacy best practices. Chapter 7 then talked about best practices in content and disciplinary literacy. So a few things that the authors took note of were developing and activating background information. So there's things like direct approach to this. Could be taking trips, really immersing students into what they're learning about so that they can um, remember what they already know or just kind of start to build some information before they actually get into a text. There's also indirect approach, which is just things that happen in the class and instruction. Maybe asking students just to recall what they know about something specifically. And then there's also making sure students have enough vocabulary for the content reading. So whatever it is they're reading, if you know they're going to struggle with it, you have to have a plan in place to make sure that they have the vocabulary skills to take on whatever reading or whatever text it is that they're going to be attacking. Graphic organizers are another important thing to be used and something that is a good best practice. So students should be using graphic organizers to visually represent what they've read, heard, or seen. And the big thing with this then is you don't want students just to be copying information. It should be from what they've learned. And this is something that you'll have to kind of model as a teacher. You don't want them to copy everything down. You want them to be able to identify key things and have it be more of an organic thing of what they're putting into their graphic organizer. And then those graphic organizers should be used to reference and explain information, something that they should be able to go back to. And if they were having a discussion with another student, they could point it out on their graphic organizer and say, this is what I learned. This is, the steps for something. So it should be used for a reference. There's also note taking. So notes should, again, not be of everything, but rather you're highlighting content. You don't want to get carried away. You don't want to be taking notes out of everything. You want to make sure that you are picking out the things that are important. So you're identifying key ideas and summarizing. And again, this is something that the teacher should model and show what they want. There's also writing to learn. So students are writing to show what they've learned about something and they're not worrying about grammar or style. So it could be something more free flowing. Students are just kind of saying, this is what I have understood, but we're not really concerned about how that writing gets to us, whether it's complete sentences, punctuation, anything like that. Some specific things that you might want to use are prompts like entrance and exit slips. Something like taking a stand was one thing that the text talked about, where a student has to pick a side on something because it's going to make their writing more focused. There's also, I focus and look specifically at the section for disciplinary literacy and history. As a history teacher, that was something that was interesting to me. So again, this talked more about different prompts that you can use to help students with what they're reading. So it could be asking students to source, which is kind of asking students what happened in this event or what happened in this passage. There's also stuff they should be answering prompts about causation. So why did something happen? What was the cause and effect? And then corroboration. So that's what were some similarities or some differences between different documents? And those are just some of the things that tend to work best in history. And then to kind of compare this, there was also a section on science. And when you're using these skills for science, it's more about applying knowledge from text to understand concepts. And then the last two sections were about close reading and annotation. So some things with this, students should be active readers. There should be some sort of model the teacher has come up with that they're using each and every time so that students know what to expect. And again, they should only be seeking out the important information. They're not writing down everything. They're not highlighting everything. They're not, if they have a sheet of paper or a document on their computer, the whole thing isn't highlighted. It's not got notes in every single inch of it. They're picking out what's important to them and only highlighting and close reading those things. So that was my summary of those best practices. I hope you learned something from this, or I hope it was at least informational. So thank you, and have a good day.